I've reached the age of 30 and currently share a home with my sister. Because it is a mother-daughter house with 2 stories, it naturally features 2 kitchens. While I am in charge of the upstairs, my sister is in charge of the basement. Because her boyfriend, who lives 30 miles away, is someone she spends a lot of time with, my sister is absent from the house on a regular basis. As I mentioned, I'm 30. Even though I know I shouldn't, there are instances when I find myself getting anxious while I'm at home alone. This took place on a night when I was home by myself, watching a horror movie in the living room of my apartment. Because the living room, dining room, and kitchen are all combined into one large space in my section of the house, the floor plan is open. As a result of the placement of my couch in the center of the room, when I am sitting there watching television, I have a significant portion of the area behind me. Consequently, for people who are easily startled, it would not be the most comfortable spot to be sitting alone in order to watch a terrifying movie. I can freely admit that as I watched in the pitch-black room with nothing but the light from the television to dispel the darkness of the room, I found myself frequently looking behind me. It would be nice to assume that I'm not the only male in his 30s who does that. But in any case, once the movie was over, I went straight to bed after brushing my teeth and turning off all of the lights in the house. A little over an hour and a half passed while I was sleeping. I woke up at approximately 1 in the morning, unsure of why I had woken up in the first place. Then, and reminiscing about this part of the experience gives me chills, I heard a voice downstairs. It sounded like my sister was in the house. The house gave off that impression. Even though she wasn't specifically asking me to open the door, I was still able to identify her voice as that of my sister. I was still sleepy and was having trouble thinking straight, so I was not aware that she was yelling at me. My mind kept going back to the thought that she must have been trying to get in touch with me, or that she was having a fight with her boyfriend. After that, I got out of bed and went into the completely dark hallway. I entered the living room after turning on the lights in the hallway and heard my sister's voice coming from the basement once more. I could make out the sound of my name being called out. I yelled back at her as I made my way downstairs in the dark and demanded to know, "What is it?" I searched for the light switch in the downstairs lobby while stumbling around aimlessly, but I was unable to locate it. When I say that I was drowsy as hell, I'm not even exaggerating. I went down the little hallway that led to the kitchen in order to locate the light switch, and once I did, I flipped it on. The light coming from the kitchen illuminates her quaint, compact apartment, including her living room. Even though the light is dim at first and takes some time to get brighter, I was still able to see that there was no one down there. Not her, not her boyfriend. I went into her bedroom, but it was deserted when I got there. At one point, I yelled out her name in a very loud voice. I didn't get a call back, but not long after I yelled, I heard something fall to the ground in my sister's bedroom, which I had just checked and found to be empty. I instantly acted like a child and went back up the stairs to my room, and then I ran back to my bed where my phone was supposed to be, and I urgently tried to find it. I tried to get in touch with her several times, but she never answered the phone. Because of my anxiety, the palms of my hands were sweating. I secluded myself in my room, trying to determine whether or not I was imagining the sounds that I was hearing. After a while, I dozed off to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, there was a text message from my sister asking me why I had contacted her at 1 in the morning. When I asked her if she had been at home the night before, she said that she had not. Rather, she was currently sleeping at the home of her boyfriend. I walked downstairs to her bedroom to check to see if anything had fallen on the floor, but there wasn't a single item there that could have caused that noise. I have been given the impression that what I heard during that night was a hallucination. Nonetheless, I choose to believe this to be the case because the alternative is far more horrific. But I've never really hallucinated anything before, and I've never suffered from any type of sleep condition, so the fact that I was able to hear my sister's voice and that sound so clearly in her room continues to terrify me to this day. I spent a lot of time alone at home when I was a kid since my mother was a single parent for a significant portion of my childhood. She worked as an RN on a lousy RN schedule, and my brother moved away to college. All of these factors contributed to the fact that I spent a lot of time alone at home. It was a weekend night, and my mom had to work overnight. So I invited over this girl named Molly, whom I had been talking to, and she stayed for a bit. This was the night that my mom had to work overnight. We watched a few movies and various other things, but ultimately she had to leave since her parents don't like it when she stays out late, so it was just me to hold down the fort by myself. I stayed in bed and continued to watch TV in my room. Because my bedroom is located on the second floor right next to the backyard, I was able to hear when someone dragged one of the chairs that were stored on the deck outside. I climbed to my feet and peered out the window, where I noticed someone was occupying one of the deck chairs located on the ground level. I thought it might be Molly, so I called her name. After all, she'd only been gone for a little under 10 minutes at that point. Whoever it was looked up at me, but it wasn't Molly. It couldn't have been anyone else. I quickly moved away from the window in order to conceal myself. In the pitch black, I did not identify anyone standing there. At the very least, I checked with a few of my closest friends through our group chat to see if any of them were playing a joke on me. Everyone who responded disagreed with you and wanted to know what you were talking about. On top of that, I had a hard time believing that any of my close friends would come over to my house to tease me in such a way. I carefully made my way back over to the window to look down again, and the person who had been sitting in the chair and staring up at my window was still there. I was scared out of my mind, but I couldn't help but be interested. It was unmistakable that he was aware of my presence. I quickly pulled myself away from the window once more to switch off the television. I curled myself into a ball in the middle of my bed, essentially with my arms encircling my knees. I had to wait for some time in the pitch black. I was so concerned that he would see the light coming from my phone screen that I didn't even want to turn it on. Because the window was open, I was terrified that he would be able to detect even the slightest motion on my part, so I didn't even want to move. I wanted him to think that I had just left the bedroom and was doing something else. I sat there for what felt like an eternity. At least 5 minutes passed while I did nothing but wait. I had a very strong suspicion that the man who had been standing outside could not possibly be found. I finally worked up the nerve to stand up and glance out the window. I was pleasantly surprised by what I saw. When I saw that he was still down there, staring up at my window rather than scurrying away from it, I felt as though a small part of me had passed away inside of me. Once more, I attempted to show some bravery and said, "What do you want?" I then saw that his shoulders started to go up and down as if you were laughing pretty hard. But he didn't make any kind of audible laughing sounds at first, so I heard a small whistling sound coming from him. I then noticed that his shoulders started to go up and down as if he were laughing really hard. It appeared as though he was laughing so hard that he was producing wheezing sounds. I pleaded with him to leave, and after he didn't respond, I turned away from the window once more. After that, I got back into bed. I didn't have the courage to call the authorities, so I went outside and sat on the landing at the top of the stairs. He was attempting to get inside the house while listening to the sound of the back door being forced open. I quickly made my way back to my room and hid there. I was 14. I was completely at a loss for what to do next. At some point, I became aware that the door to the front door was not being tampered with, and I also heard a man attempting to open the front door by pushing it open. Almost immediately, he gave up. Praise be to God, I managed to get the window in my bedroom covered up. It would have been quite easy for someone to kill me if our doors weren't locked. When I was 14, I was scrawny and weak, and I certainly wasn't one to pick a fight. That evening, I remained in my room the entire time. I didn't tell my mother what had happened until she got home around 9, and her reaction was anger at me for not calling 911. Looking back, that was a really stupid thing for me to do. It's just one of the many things I did, or rather didn't do, when I was younger that I doubt to a great extent. This is the tale of how I came dangerously close to passing away as a young child. I was at home by myself on what might have been the most stressful night of my life. Admittedly, I had way too much going on. We are a family of 5. At the time, my older brother was 14 years old, and my younger sister was 5 years old. My parents received the dreaded phone call on a Friday night, which was evidence that my brother was out with his friends and causing trouble. I was 10 years old at the time. When I heard my mother start to stress out and cry, I was in my room playing a Star Wars video game. All I can remember is hearing her start crying. I became really alarmed and hastened to determine what the issue was. My mother was speaking on the phone with a hospital employee who was calling to let my parents know that their son had been struck by a car. Obviously, this event left us all rattled and in a state of extreme fear. I only heard that my brother's leg was broken when I picked up the phone, so I have no idea what else was said. My only piece of information is that my parents hurriedly got their coats on, dragged my younger sister out of her room, and then turned to me and asked whether it was acceptable for me to stay home by myself. After I gave them the answer they were looking for, they dashed to the car and drove off. Even though I was obviously quite concerned about my brother, I really didn't want to go to the hospital and check on him in case he was in a very critical state. I don't think my parents wanted either one of us to go, but they didn't want to send my younger sister away without supervision because she was only 5 years old. It is important to point out that my brother made a full recovery because his injury is no longer important to the narrative, other than the fact that it was the reason why my father left me at home alone on a Friday night before he went out of town. My dad was attempting to reassure my mother that he was going to be all right, and seeing him in that state helped me feel better about the situation. My intuition told me that my mother was simply being dramatic for the sake of drama, as any mother would be. After a few more hours of playing, I heard the front door open. At that point, I stopped playing the Star Wars game. At this point, the door to my bedroom was already shut. It was well past midnight and well past the time that I normally go to bed. So I switched off the television and the PlayStation and got into bed. I tried listening with my Game Boy to either hear my parents' voices, which I might have been able to do if my brother was there, or just hear what they were saying, but I didn't hear anything at all. When I didn't hear them even coming up the stairs for a few minutes, I started to get the impression that something was wrong. I went to my door and opened it softly before proceeding to the ledge and banister that overlooked the living room. From there, I could see everything that was going on. Even though the lights were out, I could see that there were 3 tall individuals standing in my living room. These individuals were not members of my family. I was so scared that I hesitated for a second before I could discreetly walk back into my room and close the door as quietly as I could in my anxiety. But it wasn't quite enough, and I knew that they had to have heard the door click shut, even if it was only slightly. I was petrified. I hastened to the door of my closet, discreetly opened it, stepped inside, and then closed the door behind me. I positioned myself so that I was seated behind a number of the garment boxes and storage bags that were crammed into my wardrobe. From a distance, I actually appeared to be fairly concealed. When the door to my bedroom opened, I was waiting for it for what seemed like an eternity, and when it did, I knew in that instant that I was going to die. There was a brief amount of time that felt like an eternity. I was in the room when I heard footsteps coming in. It was impossible for me to guess how many people might have been there. It's possible there were 2 of them. I could hear footsteps coming in the direction of my bed. I overheard some of my cover songs being played. Then there was a pause. More footsteps were heading in the direction of the closet door. After then, there will be a brief period of silence. After that, the door to the closet opened. At this moment, my stomach was in knots, and my heart was in my throat. The only thing I did was remain still and hold my breath. I didn't see that the door had been propped open for quite some time because I wasn't looking up. I didn't move. Before the door could have been closed once more, there had to have been a minimum of 20 seconds of silence. There was a sound of footsteps moving away from the door and then leaving the room. When I finally got the courage to glance up, I suddenly had the realization that the person who was standing there may have seen me even though I was crouching down below the bags and boxes. After what seemed like an hour had passed, I finally heard my folks walking back into the house. I was so excited to meet them that I hurried downstairs. The people that broke into our home left the front door propped open, and they made off with a number of priceless items before they were caught. It was one of those evenings where things just kept getting worse for our family. When my parents went to the hospital, they were evidently in such a hurry that they forgot to lock the door on their way out. It was sheer good fortune that saved me from being murdered or taken hostage. When I look back on it now, I can't help but wonder if the person who opened the closet door and stood there for 20 seconds noticed me hiding inside of it. It's possible that he was just a robber who didn't intend to hurt or abduct a child on his way to the house, or that he simply didn't see me, in which case I only narrowly avoided being killed or injured.